Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." I first met David when he was about 10 years old. Anna and I were good friends with his mom, who was raising him on her own. And I thought, at least, that David was a pretty special kid. He loved magic tricks. He was an expert joke teller. And he was just phenomenal at riddles. He knew how to juggle. He was a big fan of science fiction. David's mom was poor, very poor. They lived a very minimalist life. David was poor in spirit. He didn't have a lot of reason to have hope. She couldn't give him the things that he wanted, the things that he necessarily needed, the things that his friends had. Sometimes dinner for them was a baked potato and some vegetables. As he got older, I guess in his high school years, David started doing some things that he definitely should not have been doing. He was looking for hope. He was looking for a way to escape being poor in spirit. Those things eventually killed him. I imagine that it was very difficult for him growing up with little sense of direction, without hope. His mom did the best she could, but she had to work to support him. She couldn't be there every minute of every day to make sure that he was occupied with things that were not going to be harmful to him. He looked for and he found alternatives to being poor in spirit. Things that did not make things better. From David, I learned that all solutions are not necessarily good ones. And that the only solution when we're up against the ropes is turning to God. I learned from David that a quick fix is not necessarily the answer. David's death teaches us to bring our despair, our hopelessness to God. That is something that we're all supposed to do. I also learned the importance of having a strong, faithful community to surround you, to keep the light shining, to better enable us from turning down those dark roads. I learned those things from David because he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." He said, "Blessed are those who mourn." Now, I knew Jean my whole life. She was one of my mom's best friends. Jean the Bean, we called her. Jean the Bean. She was always one of my favorites of my mom's friends because she always made people laugh. She was Irish, not just a little Irish. She was full-on Blarney Stone kissing Irish. She could entertain you for hours with her stories. And as much as she loved to talk, she was also a phenomenal listener. She cared deeply for those around her. One of my most vivid memories of Jean was when her husband Ed died. When her husband died, I expected her to shrink. I expected her to fall apart. not Jean. She was a woman of great faith. And when I first saw Jean after Ed died, she was so fully devoted to making sure that everyone around her was being cared for. She mourned. She mourned. But she cared so deeply for others that her cheerfulness, her hope never left her. Jean taught me the value of facing our fears. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for God is with me. We do go through the valley of the shadow of death. We get to the other side. She taught me that humor and compassion can go hand in hand. I learned from Jean because Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn." He said, "Blessed are the meek." I met my best friend Richard in high school. His mom, Esther, had 3 kids from a husband who was, to be blunt, not a good husband. He left her with 3 kids, and she did the best that she could to raise them. She had tremendous faith, raising her kids in the Lutheran Church. To my knowledge, Esther never once complained. Everything she had, everything she did for her kids. She was a nurse, and from what I understand, she was a pretty good one, caring compassionately for others through her work. When my oldest daughter was baptized, she made this beautiful needlepoint for her, which we still have somewhere in the house. Don't ask me to find it. In the late 1980s, she started having heart problems. And she died about 6.5 months before my second daughter was born. Esther was about a year younger than I am now. From Esther, I learned the joy that comes from serving. The joy that comes from serving. There was seemingly no end to her ability to care, for her capacity for compassion. She thought of others first. She thought of others always. If it's true that the meek shall inherit the earth, then there will undoubtedly be a country called Esther. Because she was one of the most giving, most selfless people I've ever met. I learned from Esther because he said, "Blessed are the meek." He said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." I did not know Sinini well. I did not know Sinini long. In fact, I did not know her at a time when she was not fighting cancer. She was in a disciple Bible study with us. She was dying, but she still wanted to, she still needed to take this class. She had such a compassion for those less fortunate than she, which is a pretty ironic statement considering that she was dying when I knew her. She didn't let anything stop her. Anything. She started a thrift store in Piscataway for working people who could not afford to buy their own clothes. She started a card writing ministry whose goal was to ensure that no one felt disenfranchised. These were things that she started, by the way, while she was fighting cancer. She was a mother, she was a sister, she was an activist, she was an artist, she was an all-around remarkable woman. Cancer may have taken her body, but not her spirit. From Sinini, I learned a passion for doing what's right. No matter what the circumstance, no matter how hard things may seem, Sinini had a passion for justice and a mercy for others. She fought for others as strenuously as she fought for her own life. I learned from Sanini because he said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." He said, "Blessed are the merciful." We called my maternal grandmother Granny. No snobby names for her. It wasn't grandma, it wasn't grandmother, it was Granny. She was a granny in every sense of the word. She worked in a department store until she was 77 or 78 years old. She ate chili dogs until she was 99, and I maintain that that's what helped her to live to 102. She got me the best Levi's jeans when I was growing up because of her working in that department store. Unbeknownst to me, my wife and her family knew my grandmother before they knew me because they shopped at her store. And she waited on them all the time. For most of the last 25 years of her life, she lived in a mobile home park by herself. By herself. She lived to 102. She cooked for the other people in the mobile home park who could not cook for or care for themselves, and every single one of them was younger than she. She never drove a car. She loved animals than probably anyone I ever met. She always had a dog. Much to my mother's dismay, she always fed stray and wild animals. And she had no fear whatsoever of anyone or anything, whatever dangers may have existed from doing that. She cared for others, and she always made sure to do the best to her ability. She made sure that others were always taken care of. I learned a determination from her. A determination to make sure that others are okay. Others are safe. I learned from her example that as long as there are others in need, our job is to provide. I learned from Granny because Jesus said, "Blessed are the merciful." He said, "Blessed are the pure in heart." At my mom's funeral, we all wore something yellow. Yellow was not just my mom's favorite color, it spoke to her undying optimism. Everything was yellow and sunshiny. My mother didn't see the glasses half empty or half full. She saw the glasses overflowing, a veritable cornucopia of opportunities and love. Over the course of her life, she was in love with two men. My dad and Frank Sinatra. He died, she grew up in a broken home. I never met her father. He died before I was born. And we knew from very little information that she ever gave, we knew that he was not a good man. But we really didn't find out the scope of the abuse that he gave until after my mom died. She kept everything internal. But she did manage to find it in her heart to forgive him for what he had done to her family. But she never spoke of him. She could not tell a story, and this is so true, she could not tell a story without breaking off into so many tangents that she'd forgotten what the original story was. More than anything, she loved having her entire family around the dining room table. And as we grew, getting married, having kids, and so on, she loved it even more. When my parents planned their 50th wedding anniversary, which at that point our family was only 30 people, she and my dad took the entire family to Disney World. I cannot remember her ever disliking anyone. She was robbed of her life by Alzheimer's, But as that disease stole her from us, I would sit at her bedside and I would pray with her. She didn't necessarily know who I was. She didn't necessarily know who she was. But when I prayed the Lord's Prayer, she knew that. She knew that. And she said those words. I learned from my mother unconditional love. Unconditional love. I learned love of family. I learned love of others. I learned love of life. I often describe myself as a bleary-eyed optimist because of her. I learned from my mother because Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart." He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Norman moved into the house next door to us when I was about 10. He died when I was about 20. He and his wife did not have any children of their own, and I think that's why they were always so welcoming of me. I would go hang out with them, and they were always very happy to have me there. I was like a surrogate son to them. Norman was always a friend to me. He was as big a Yankee fan as I am. Don't hold that against him. He gave me my first grown-up book. Of course, it was a Yankee book. But he was also a source of peace from the very typical relationship that teenagers have with their parents. At the time that Norman died, my father and I were at each other's throats. Norman's death was what brought reconciliation to the two of us, peace between the two of us. We never fought again after that. One other thing about Norman, as a side note, his brother Tom committed suicide in the late 70s, early 80s. I don't remember exactly when. It turned out that Tom was one of the many, many people who could not handle the stigma that society puts on LGBTQ people. Today in 2023, there is a greater understanding, there's a greater acceptance of how much more likely LGBTQ people are. There's an understanding, of how much more likely LGBTQ people are of committing suicide when they are not accepted, when they are not loved. But in the mid-70s, there was nothing. After Tom died, Norman made sure that I always knew that if I ever had problems that I wanted to talk about, he would be there. I learned peace from Norman. The friendship I received from him taught me that a genuine friendship can be a source of comfort, a source of peace. Norman never put any pressure on me to be something I wasn't. He never made me feel unwelcome. I learned from Norman because Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." He said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness." Pat was born and raised in Hawaii before it was a state. She lived near Pearl Harbor, and she remembered being woken up by the Japanese planes flying overhead on December 7th, 1941. Years later, she met her husband George, who was from New Jersey, and he was serving in the Navy stationed in Pearl Harbor. When Pat was pregnant with her second child, she contracted polio. She gave birth to her child in an iron lung, and she spent the rest of her life, about 35 or 40 years after that, in a wheelchair, dependent upon others to help her do absolutely everything. She slept on a bed that pivoted up and down all night, head to toe, head to toe. When the head was down, it allowed oxygen to escape her lungs, and when the head was up, it allowed oxygen to come into her lungs. That's how she slept every night for 35 years. Pat was a woman of great faith. She went to a church in the town where I lived every chance she could. The church had Bible studies that she participated in, and she inspired others. They had a ministry specific for Pat that ensured that she was always, always with someone who could take care of her, who could help her. Pat taught me that life is not always what we may see as fair. Pat taught me that we can lament, we can feel sorry for ourselves, for all the things that are wrong, or we can celebrate what's right. She chose to live out the old expression, when life hands you lemons, make lemonade. She lived that expression out by making lemonade. I learned from Pat because Jesus said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness." Jesus said that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second commandment is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. My dad never stopped telling me that. He struggled to understand why it was necessary to go through 3 or 4 years of seminary when all we really needed to know was that greatest commandment. As long as we know that commandment, we know everything there is to know in the Bible, he would say. He was devoted. He was a devoted man of God. And growing up, I learned what it meant to be a good neighbor from him. He was involved in running our church's Sunday school. He umpired Little League games. He once called me out on strikes, by the way. He coached Little League as well. He was on the Plainfield City Council. He went to every single concert and every single play I was ever in. He was selfless. He was devoted to his family. He was devoted especially to his wife, my mother. And when my mother got sick, he gave up everything to care for her. He gave up his golf game to care for her. That was a big deal. He was a man of God who gave all his heart, all his soul, all his mind, and all of his strength to God and to neighbor. After he fell and broke his hip in 2017, he was trying to tell us that his fight was over. The pain medications that they had given him were causing his very analytical CPA brain to falter. And that was unacceptable to him. He seemed confused. He seemed unable to communicate. Seemed being the operative word. But one night, about a week before he died, he was mumbling, and I was struggling to understand. He couldn't be left alone because he was fighting against the stuff in his bed, the stuff in his arm. So it was my turn to be with him overnight, and he was mumbling, and I leaned in, and I realized he was praying. A good Catholic to the very end, he was praying the Hail Mary. Holy Mother, Hail Mary, Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners. Now and at the hour of our death. Now, I broke away from the Roman Catholic Church when I was 18, as some of you know. It upset my mother, but Dad, he was very matter-of-fact about it, very analytical about it. He knew that we were all worshiping the same God, right? He knew that God didn't put labels on things. He knew that all we have to do is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And he knew that because that's what Jesus said. That's what Jesus did. We all have those saints. We all have those saints who have come before us, our family, our friends, people who we've known personally, or people we've only heard about. Those people, those saints of the church, those saints of our individual lives, they live on. They live on in our memories, and we celebrate them today on All Saints' Day. Our faith comes from them. Our vulnerabilities come from them. Our hopes and our dreams come from them. Our compassion, our love comes from them. We learned from them, we learned with them, and we continue to learn from them. Who are those people in your life? Name them today. Who are those people who have gone on to glory in God's kingdom? Those saints. I'm going to invite you to come up and name them today. Perhaps share how your faith is strengthened by them. I'm going to invite you to come up and light a candle for your saint. Light a candle for the saint who informed your faith. Say their name. If you'd like to share a memory, whether just a word or perhaps more, please feel free to do so. And as you remember these people, as you remember these saints, and this is the important part here, think about how you will be remembered years from now. When people read, "Blessed are the peacemakers," will they think of you? When people hear, "Blessed are the pure in heart," will your face be what comes to mind? Make your commitment on this All Saints' Day to remember those who came before us in the faith by being one who is memorable to those who come after. We leave today, our feet lifting a step down a path already long and well traveled by those saints who have gone before us. Let us be known by the love that those saints taught us in the breaking and the sharing of the bread of life. Do not leave here to walk alone in the storms of life, but rather, as the light of Christ guides your step, shine your light to be a beacon of God's love to others. May your lives be guided by the Spirit that is present in you and bring hope to all who will someday remember us as saints who lit the path for them. My friends, we go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Amen.